before anything else, I need to ask you a question that might feel a little uncomfortable, but it may be exactly what you need to hear today. When was the last time you prayed and truly felt like you were speaking to God for real, with your heart fully involved, with your mind present, with your soul on fire, and not just repeating words you're already used to saying almost automatically? Because there is a huge difference between praying and merely saying a prayer, and this is exactly where many people are getting lost without even realizing it. Because they keep talking to God, but they are no longer connected to Him. They keep the habit, but they've lost the fire. They keep the form, but without the presence. And this is more common than you think. And it was exactly this kind of reality that men like John Wesley faced in their time. And it continues to be one of the greatest spiritual challenges to this day. Because the problem was never the lack of prayer. The problem has always been the lack of fervor within it. And maybe you're realizing this right now. Maybe you still pray every day. Maybe you still have moments with God. But something has changed. Something has cooled down. Something is no longer the same. And you can't exactly explain why. You just know it's not what it used to be. And it begins so subtly that almost no one notices at first, because it doesn't happen all at once. It's not abrupt, it's a silent process, where little by little the intensity decreases. The surrender becomes superficial. The attention starts to scatter. And when you realize it, you are still there, but you're no longer whole, no longer present, no longer burning inside. And here is a truth you need to face with spiritual maturity. The fervor in prayer does not disappear without a reason. It is lost because of small decisions repeated over time, small distractions accepted, small neglects tolerated, small moments where you chose other things instead of God. And that doesn't mean you stopped loving God, but it does mean that other things started to occupy the space that should belong to Him. And that directly affects the way you pray, because prayer is not just an isolated moment in your day. Prayer is the reflection of your life as a whole. It is the result of what you are feeding inside yourself daily. It is the consequence of what fills your mind, what holds your attention, what governs your heart. So when your life is full of distractions, your prayer will be distracted. When your mind is overloaded, your prayer will be superficial. When your heart is divided, your prayer will be cold. And maybe here lies one of the deepest reasons why your prayers no longer have fervor. You are trying to have intensity in a moment, but you live disconnected the rest of the time. You want to feel something strong in prayer, but you are not cultivating anything throughout the day that sustains it. And that creates frustration, because you enter prayer expecting something you didn't build. Now let me show you something powerful that can completely change the way you see this. Fervor in prayer does not begin the moment you kneel down. It begins long before. It begins in the way you live, in the way you think, in the way you position yourself throughout the day. It begins in the small, invisible decisions that no one sees, but that build or destroy your spiritual sensitivity. And John Wesley understood this deeply. That's why his life was not divided between spiritual moments and ordinary moments. Everything was lived with awareness. Everything was lived with intention. Everything was lived with God in mind. And that made it so that when he arrived at prayer, he was already prepared, already sensitive, already aligned. And that's why there was fervor, because there was consistency. Now think with me honestly. How many times do you try to compensate with an intense prayer for what you neglected all day? How many times do you try to resolve in minutes what should have been built in hours? How many times do you enter the presence of God without preparing your heart, without quieting your mind, without slowing down your pace, and expect something deep to happen immediately? This is not about condemnation. It's about understanding, because when you understand this, you stop blaming yourself and start adjusting. You stop thinking the problem is that God is distant, and you begin to realize that maybe you're just not creating the right environment to experience His presence. And here comes something extremely practical. that can transform your prayer life. You need to learn to slow down before you pray, because a rushed mind cannot connect deeply. A restless heart cannot dive into His presence. And this requires intentionality. It requires you to turn off distractions, to step away from noise, to breathe, to become aware of the moment, to recognize that you are entering something sacred. Because prayer is not just speaking, prayer is positioning. It is alignment, it is surrender. And this does not happen automatically. It needs to be cultivated. Now there is another truth that many avoid, but that needs to be said. Sometimes the problem is not just distraction. It is lack of sincerity, because you may be saying the right words with a distant heart. You may be speaking spiritual things without truly feeling them. You may be repeating phrases that no longer carry meaning for you, and that kills fervor. Because God does not respond to performance, God responds to truth. And maybe what you need is not to pray beautifully, but to pray honestly, to come before God and say exactly how you are, without masks, without trying to appear strong, without trying to impress, just being real. And that changes everything, because when you are real, prayer stops being an effort and becomes an encounter. Now I want you to understand something very important. Fervor is not a feeling you need to experience all the time. It is a posture of the heart. It is a decision to seek God with sincerity, even when you feel nothing, even when it seems empty, even when it seems dry. And this is where many give up, because they confuse fervor with emotion. And when emotion doesn't come, they think something is wrong, but in reality, it is exactly in these moments that faith is built. It is in these moments that discipline is strengthened. It is in these moments that the relationship deepens. Because loving God is not just about feeling, it is about remaining. And that is exactly what John Wesley taught with his life. Not just with words, but with daily practice, with consistency, with commitment, with a pursuit that did not depend on mood, did not depend on emotion, did not depend on circumstances. Now let me ask you one more question that can change everything. Are you willing to keep praying even when you feel nothing? Are you willing to seek even when it seems empty? Are you willing to remain even when it is hard? Because that is what separates a superficial faith from a deep faith. And if you made it this far, I want to ask you something simple but powerful. Right here in the comments, I want to return to my first love. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Because this is not just a video, this can be the beginning of a restoration in your spiritual life. Now that you understand that fervor does not disappear by chance, but is the result of a silent process within you, it's time for the most important part. Because it is not enough to identify the problem. You need to know how to reignite what seems to have gone out. And here is something that can completely change the way you pray. Spiritual fire does not return with haste. It returns with process. It returns with consistency. It returns when you decide to rebuild, even without feeling anything at the beginning. And this requires maturity, because most people want to feel first and then surrender. But the true path is the opposite. You surrender first. You position yourself first. You seek first, and then little by little, the heart begins to respond. Little by little, sensitivity returns. Little by little, the fire reignites. And this is a principle that men like John Wesley lived intensely. Because they did not depend on feelings to seek God, they created the environment for the fire to remain alive. And the first step you need to take is extremely simple, but deeply neglected. You need to define an intentional moment for God every single day. Not just any moment, not an improvised space, but a separated, protected, valued time. Because what is not a priority will always be interrupted, will always be postponed, will always be replaced. And maybe you say you don't have time, but the truth is, we always have time for what we consider important. So the problem is not lack of time, it is lack of decision. And when you decide, you reorganize your routine. You create space, you protect that moment as something sacred. because you understood that your spiritual life depends on it. Now pay close attention to this because it may seem simple, but it is extremely powerful. Do not begin your prayer by speaking. Begin your prayer by becoming still, because you cannot enter the presence of God the same way you leave a noisy environment. You need transition. You need to slow down. You need to breathe. You need to become aware that you are standing before something holy. Stay in silence for a few minutes, even if it feels strange at first, even if your mind starts to race, even if thoughts try to distract you, remain there, because this silence is not empty. It is preparation. It is alignment. It is the beginning of a deeper connection. After that, begin to speak with God in a simple way, without trying to impress, without trying to use beautiful words. Just speak as someone who is talking to someone real, because God does not need your performance. He wants your truth. And perhaps your biggest mistake until now has been trying to pray correctly. Instead of praying honestly, say how you are, say what you feel, say even what you do not understand, because sincerity opens doors that religiosity will never open. And when you begin to be real before God, something inside you begins to unlock. Something begins to flow. Something begins to align. Now there is another point you cannot ignore. You need to feed your mind with what sustains your faith, because it is useless to try to have fervor in prayer if, throughout the day, you are filling your mind with things that pull you away from God, because what you consume shapes what you feel, and what you feel influences how you pray. Read the Word. Meditate, think, reflect. Let it enter deep within you, because prayer becomes more alive when it is born from a heart that has been fed by truth. And this is not automatic. It is built. It is cultivated. It is developed with discipline. And here is something that can completely transform your practice. Do not pray only in specific moments. Begin to include God throughout your day, in simple thoughts, in short phrases, in conscious actions, because when God stops being just a moment and becomes a constant presence, prayer stops being heavy and becomes natural. That is what made the difference in the life of John Wesley, because he did not live disconnected, waiting for a spiritual moment. He lived aware, he lived attentive, he lived aligned. And that made his prayer just a continuation of something that was already happening inside him. Now let me touch on a point that may be difficult, but is necessary. You need to deal with what is cooling your heart, because sometimes it is not just lack of practice. It is an excess of wrong things. It is unaddressed sin, uncontrolled distraction, misaligned priorities. And while this is not dealt with, fervor will not fully return. And this is not about guilt. It is about adjustment. It is about recognizing. It is about deciding to change. It is about positioning yourself differently, because God does not move away from you. But there are things you allow that create distance in your perception. And when you begin to clear that, when you begin to realign, something inside you starts to respond again. And here is a secret that few understand. Consistency defeats intensity, because it is not one strong prayer in a single day that transforms your life. It is a life of constant prayer that builds something deep within you. It is repetition. It is discipline. It is the silent commitment that no one sees but God honors. So do not expect to feel something extraordinary every day. Expect to be faithful. Expect to continue. Expect to remain. Because the fire is not sustained by isolated moments. It is sustained by continuity. And maybe today you still feel nothing. Maybe today it still seems dry. Maybe today it is still difficult. But if you continue, if you remain, if you decide not to give up, something will change. Because the heart responds to what is cultivated with persistence. Now pay very close attention, because what you are about to understand here can completely change not only the way you pray, but the way you live every single day. Because the real goal is not just to recover fervor for a few moments, but to learn how to live in a state where your soul remains on fire, even when circumstances do not help, even when feelings do not follow, even when everything seems dry on the outside, because there is a level of spiritual life where prayer stops being a heavy effort and becomes a place of rest, a place of encounter, a place where you do not have to force anything, because you have already learned to remain, you have already learned to be, you have already learned to position yourself, and this does not happen overnight. It is built, it is developed, it is sustained by daily decisions that many times no one sees. And here is one of the greatest keys you need to keep. Fervor is not something you seek only when you miss it. It is something you protect every day. Because everything in your life is trying to steal your attention. Everything is competing for your focus. Everything is trying to occupy the space that should belong to God. And if you do not watch, if you are not intentional, you will lose what took time to build. That is why John Wesley did not treat spiritual life as something secondary. He understood that it was the center of everything, and that is why there was discipline. That is why there was consistency. That is why there was sacrifice. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Because he knew that without it, even the most sincere faith could grow cold. Now let me show you something deep that few people notice. The greatest sign that your prayer is returning to the right place is not when you feel something strong. It is when you begin to desire to be there, even without feeling anything extraordinary. It is when you begin to value that moment. It is when you begin to miss it when you do not pray. It is when your soul begins to recognize that there is life there, even if your emotions are still adjusting. Because a real relationship is not sustained by intense emotions all the time. It is sustained by presence, by commitment, by consistency. And that is exactly what God is calling you to live. Something deeper than passing feelings, something more solid, more stable, more real. And maybe you are still waiting for that day when everything will return to how it used to be. That moment when you will feel the same fire, the same intensity, the same emotion. But the truth is that God does not want to take you back only to what you already lived. He wants to take you to a deeper level, more mature, more consistent, where your faith does not depend on what you feel, but on who you have become. And that changes everything, because now you are no longer just seeking experiences. You are building a life. You are no longer chasing moments. You are developing a relationship. You are no longer trying to feel something. You are learning to remain, and that is far more powerful than any temporary emotion. Now I want to give you a final direction, something practical, something you can start today, without waiting for perfect conditions, without waiting to feel something different. Choose a time, even if it is simple, even if it is short, and commit to it. Every single day, without negotiating, without postponing, without depending on your mood, just do it. Because it is in repetition that the heart aligns. It is in consistency that sensitivity returns. It is in faithfulness that the fire is sustained. Protect that moment, value that moment, treat that moment as something sacred. Because it is, and when you begin to do that, you will start to notice small changes, maybe not immediate, maybe not explosive, but real, deep, consistent, and over time, what seemed dead begins to live again. And when you least expect it, you will realize that your prayer has changed, that your mind is more focused, that your heart is more sensitive, that your presence before God is more real, more alive, more deep. And you will understand that fervor did not return all at once. It was rebuilt day after day, decision after decision. If this spoke to you, write here in the comments, I will reignite the fire. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because this is not just content. This is direction. This is alignment. This can be the beginning of something new inside you. And never forget this. Even when you feel nothing, even when it seems empty, even when it is difficult, continue, remain. Because those who remain are transformed, and those who are transformed live something that most people will never experience.